This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 131, Summer PD Series number 6.
But now I can pursue it in this other way or this different way or in this other format or something. But if it was your goal and you disappear, then it ends. And it's like they're not, they just have a negative experience from that goal. And so they may associate that with goal setting itself. And that's not a good outcome.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here without my typical co-host, Mr. Matt Rogers, but I am here with my good friend, Don Berg, coming back to the Powered Up Podcast. I am super excited to have you back, and I am super excited to continue our second annual Summer PD series. If this is the first time you are listening to our podcast overall, you're jumping right in the middle of our Summer PD series, where we break the format of our typical show and we try to dive deep on a specific topic that we feel would be most beneficial for our listeners and our teachers during the summer break. Our typical show format, we have on amazing educators, authors, speakers, or scientists and researchers like we have Don here with us. And we get to know their passions, what has led them through their career in education and related to education. But tonight we're really diving deep on a specific topic. So for purposes of this conversation, in addition to being the host of the podcast, I am a former fifth grade teacher, former elementary STEM teacher, and I am now serving as a secondary instructional coach. Don, welcome back. Say hi to everybody and give them a quick intro of who you are and what you do.
All right. Thanks for having me. My approach to the experience in the whole world of education came from a very different angle. When I have over a decade of experience leading children in a variety of settings, but not usually in a formal classroom setting. So one of the most interesting ways I did that was actually homeschool other people's kids for a time. And yet is about using the community as the primary learning resource, really diving into what was available, libraries, parks, whatever it was. But I then later on went and got a degree in psychology and studied patterns of motivation in two schools that operate in very different ways for my thesis research. So I have both practical experience working with kids and a degree in psychology, and so that's what I bring to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for those of you listening, if you did not hear when Don was on our show before, he was on show 107. So I would encourage you to go back and check that out because it was a really, really interesting show where we learn a lot about, like Don said, the science and the understanding behind things that happen in the school that can really help impact our instruction. So today I want to focus on the topic of goal setting. And I am personally very excited about this conversation because I am an extremely goal-oriented person. I set goals in many different facets in my life. And when I honestly evaluate it, sometimes I knock them out of the park, and other times they completely fade away. And so I'm interested to see how this conversation can not only help me, but when I was in the classroom, self-contained fifth grade teacher, goal setting was a huge part of my classroom right off the bat and throughout the school year. So I want to talk about those experiences, but really lean on you, Don, as well with your understanding and your knowledge related to this topic. So to start off nice and slow, how would you define goal setting? And are there any common misconceptions that you think exist around goal setting that would help clear anything up for our audience?
Yeah, I think goal setting is really interesting because it's one of those things where um, we on the simplest level, it's just sort of like I have an intention, I'm going to do something, and there's some state of the world or state of myself that I see a difference between the way I want it to be and the way it is. And then so therefore you have a goal, you have a way to get to that different place than you are already. So that's a very simple way to look at it. But it turns out that it's really complicated. um, because what we don't realize is that, sure, I have this intention, but there's a whole set of processes going on in my brain that I'm not even aware of. In fact, most of what we think about, if you think of thoughts as just anything going on in the brain, most of what you're thinking is not available to the mind that's setting goals, the mind that is, deciding on what the way the world should be versus the way it is. Um, so that actually introduces a lot of complication that is really hard to wrap your brain around, because you could say that there's these ways that your brain has these goals that you're not even aware of. So it's immediately complicated by the fact that you're trying. Well, I mean, the simplest thing is like your body is trying to maintain some homeostasis, trying to keep itself fed and watered, and keep the oxygen coming in.
So like kind of like bringing in Maslow's hierarchy, like those essential needs are almost goal. Your brain almost looks at those
Right,
as
right.
goals,
I
and
mean,
that
see that Maslow's hierarchy is a little tricky because there's no hierarchy. There's a simplistic hierarchy. Yes, you will die sooner from loss of air than you do loss of food. Like, okay, so there's a simple time hierarchy. But in terms of the way often people talk about hierarchy of needs, like they'll say, uh, you have to meet certain needs before you meet other needs. Not really. Now, when you run into those time horizons, like, yes, if someone's really starving, they're not going to be getting other need, like that's that
right,
time
right,
field.
right.
But we also have to recognize that someone like Gandhi um, did fasting as a part of his protest. So he, you know, he was doing amazing goal-oriented, purposeful work in the world while he was literally starving himself, because later in his life he was trying to keep India together, or to make progress on things. So he was overriding what are usually considered lower goals. Like he was overriding the need for food with purpose and with these meaningful goals that were super important for not only him but to many people. So I basically Maslow's hierarchy isn't really a good model, but
Right, right.
uh, but beyond that, there is a certain you have to respect the fact that the body needs things, nonetheless. But that's where in education in particular, we do need to get the kids fed, but then part of that needs to be the meaningfulness that they derive from the learning experience, from how they're engaging, and that's actually one of those, what you would say, meta goals that the body has. Is autonomy is one of those meta goals. It's one of those things that if your goal undermines the meta goal, like you say, okay, well, I'm gonna lose weight, and so I'm gonna get more exercise, I'm gonna eat less food or something like that. Well, you can set that goal, but that doesn't mean that your body's necessarily going to go along with it. And that's where you have, when you say, sometimes those goals peter out, sometimes those goals just don't quite work out. Well, the first thing to look at is, were you undermining your own autonomy by trying to control yourself? Like, just the way a teacher can be too controlling in a classroom and it stops the learning, you can do that for yourself. You can say, "Oh, I'm going to just be so disciplined." Well, if you're trying to override your own autonomy, or what are these other goals, relatedness, or you can the goals that the conscious mind is setting are always going to be overridden by the meta goals that your body has. Like
Okay,
that's
so
the way it
that
happens.
that makes sense, and so for purposes of this conversation, to our listeners, we're gonna talk a lot about this, but we're also going to experience this in the lens of setting our own goals as professionals and also looking at how to incorporate this with students. So we will dive back and forth between those. So let me give an example and see if there's is some sort of reasoning, and maybe this is a good example for what you're saying. So this podcast, this is we're in the 130s of this podcast, and I have not missed a week since we launched, and I really had two goals: never miss a week and focus on producing quality content. And I'd like to think we're doing our best with the quality content, and we haven't missed a week. I've always wanted to produce content related to education and just try to create a product that's useful and meaningful for teachers. I tried so many times to blog, to write, and it always felt heavy. It was difficult for me to do. And it's not that I dislike writing, but it was just getting my ideas on paper on a consistent basis. I never lasted more than a couple weeks. Then I was like, maybe, and then a year later, maybe I'll do it every other week. It won't be as often. It didn't matter the frequency. And so this one, I hit it right away. So is there a part of that is just because I enjoy it more than another, or is that meta goal part of that? How can teachers evaluate why they're so successful with one goal and they struggle with another?
Well, I think that's exactly right to look at those meta goals. Look at autonomy, competence, and relatedness being the main ones that contribute to meaningfulness. Now, beneficence or benevolence is another one. You don't miss it when it's gone, but it's definitely something you have to take into account. And so, yeah, that's where um, the disconnect is likely in one of those areas. Is do you really uh, value it in the way you think you do? What is it that you value about it? Like it may be that writing is too lonely, and so this thing is much more of a related. We're directly relating to each other. We can see each other. We get a lot of cues from each other. So there's a lot of relatedness in this, and so that might be a much stronger way for you to express who you are. Um, and enjoyment is likely one of those things that's derived from getting all those needs met. It's all juicy and interesting because you have these ways that you're operating to be competent. Maybe that could be another piece of it too. I don't know how you feel about your writing, or whether the mechanics of writing are a difficult part. I know, as somebody who's written a number of books, it's like, I never saw myself, as a writer per se, although I have a bunch of books out. It's like, but that was also there's an overriding goal of like, oh, okay, I really enjoy the process of putting the ideas together. There's an aspect to it, even if the editing is not my strength, or there's aspects to it that are really challenging, and that's why it's great to have a team. um, and I also have produced a lot of videos in the last couple of years, and that I find that that's actually uh, also a very energizing part of the process. And I have a harder time kind of doing some of the basic outreach that I need to be doing, but you got to find ways to work with those things, and you also have to look at what are the fundamentals of like for yourself as somebody who's teaching. If you're in the classroom, that takes a lot of energy. My writing made a transformation when I was able to kind of quit the day job and and really focus on the writing and that process. And so, you know it's getting into it, finding those leverages for how to pursue it in a way that's really satisfying is very important.
Okay. So, how do teachers set a successful goal for the school year? So, let's just say that it's summertime, they're listening to this, and they want to approach the year and they want to set some sort of goal related to what they do on a daily basis with students, whether it's an instructional goal, relationship goal with classroom culture, anything that impacts the daily practice of their classroom. How can they search for that goal successfully and set themselves up to successfully pursue it?
Yeah, I think the uh, really the the thing about knowing yourself is, okay, figure out the intersection between what I'm good at, what I enjoy, and what I have to do. Um, is where do those things come together? And sometimes there are going to be things that you just got to do. And if the more you can frame the necessary activities that you may not necessarily want to do but have to do, the more you can deeply uh, uh, play with or be in the bigger picture. The how does this serve your other goals? How does it, how can I find something about this that really is an expression of who I am? Is really diving deep into, okay, is this truly necessary? And if it is necessary, how can I do it in a way that's interesting, engaging, that 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 gets serves those meta needs, the meta goals of the autonomy and the competence and the relatedness and beneficence, is finding and ways to mine that activity for opportunities for that. And sometimes it may mean training yourself in doing it, like behavioral training works. Give yourself, where can I give myself a reward for doing this thing? That's
Yeah,
the
is there key pieces in checkpoints or you know small goals that reach towards a larger goal? Is there logic and reasoning in establishing those?
Oh, absolutely. That largely has, when you talk about small goals, is what you're doing is you're trying to mine that thing for, okay, what's something achievable right now? Because you're going to get a little rid of like, okay, got it done, good. If I'd have tried to approach books as like, okay, now how do I write 24 chapters, on this thing? It's like, no, that'll never work. I actually, my latest book was really taking several other books and then figuring how to weave them together. Iterating on things is a really helpful thing. So mining it for those gems and figuring out, okay, it is accomplishing, checking off the box, something that's really rewarding. I don't find checklists to be particular. I have checklists because I need to keep track of a lot of complicated things, but that's not what's rewarding for me. But there are people for whom, like, getting that checkbox done, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, that
Hmm.
just doesn't
Like
have
the
anything to me.
people that write, they did it and then they write it on their checklist just to check it off.
Exactly,
Those
exactly.
are, if that's you, that's a motivator for you.
Exactly. And it's finding those little things that are like, okay, how do I manipulate my own behavior to get me to do the things I really need to do to really serve my bigger goals? There's nothing wrong with rewards and punishments if you're using them carefully, if you're using them in the service of the bigger goals, of more meaningful goals. I had to learn how to make videos or write, good sentences, and I'm getting better, but you're never done either. Um, so yeah, it's really mining your knowledge of yourself, knowledge of what your goals are, and always, if there's something that you're having difficulty with, how does it tie back to or into that bigger goal, that bigger, more juicy, more interesting thing? And quite frankly, be really ruthless about not doing things that you absolutely don't have to do. If you really can get away with not doing it, give yourself a buy and say, go for it. Like okay, I don't need to do that. Um, but that's a tricky decision too, especially if you're talking about being in a context of teaching, where you've got kids and you've got principals and you've got a larger system. That's where in that context you really need to probably be collaborating on what are the things I really have to be doing. Collaborating
How
with your principal and stuff.
how much how much how much of a benefit do you think it is for people to have, whether it's an accountability partner or people involved in the goal with them, to help them move towards what they're ultimately striving for?
uh, Amazingly important. And I'm someone who is happy to be a loner, be off on my thing, doing my thing. But having someone who can be like, you know, my partner doesn't hold me accountable, um, but she's interested in what I'm up to. She's supportive, and so it's up to me to figure it out, how to get it done. But it's amazing what a difference it makes to have that person in my life, to have somebody who's you know really going to say, "Oh, how'd that go? How is it going? What are you doing next?" because we have both the relatedness, the particular relatedness one. I mean, like people like myself who can be happily alone might underestimate the level of value that we get out of relatedness. I realize it now as I've gotten older. As when I was younger, I was like, oh, I'll just be, go do my thing. Didn't work out very well. But when you get a partner in there, that makes a big difference. And it is something to recognize that both autonomy and relatedness sometimes might seem like they contradict each other, like it's one or the other, not both. But it is both. Um, you know, we are not autonomous without others. It actually doesn't work unless we really find out ways to work with other people on whatever it is. Um, and people do have different set points for that. Like I happen to be, I think, have a very high need for autonomy, probably more so than my need for relatedness. But it doesn't mean I don't have both. It just means that one might be defaulting more higher than the other. And that's an important thing to figure out for yourself. Is like, oh, okay. I mean, one thing that short circuits a lot of my goals is if I don't feel competent in the thing, like I was had an opportunity to travel to France last year, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'll just pick up some French, So I got some books and things. Didn't happen. um, because I think mainly because I didn't feel competent in learning that language or in language learning, and I didn't find the app or anything that some magic thing to make it work. But it also wasn't that of a higher priority. Maybe someday I will. Um, it's on my bucket list to actually pick up another language. But I've also realized for myself that the best way to do that is going to be go live there, wherever. I just want to live somewhere else for long enough, probably 3 to 5 years, long enough to pick up the language.
Right, right. So from a teacher's perspective, if we're thinking who can we use as accountability partners, there's multiple strategies. One, if you have a good relationship with your administrator, one that you feel is very supportive of you, or you're on the rotation of observations that year, you can align those goals to that, and that's going to be a strong accountability partner. But I would say, from my perspective, and I'm sure you would agree, Don, that there has to be that level of trust with your administrator, not one
Right.
that you feel anxious about that process. You have your grade level partners or your content area partners, whether you're elementary or secondary, that you can maybe set common goals, or maybe you both just set a goal that's completely unrelated, but once a week, once a month, you check in with each other and you ask, how's it going? And even just knowing that a person is going to say, hey, what have you done? That sometimes can be motivation enough, because we don't want to disappoint that person.
That's right. That's right.
And the last group that I would say is your students.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I was very open with my students, and I would tell them my goals.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell them what I was hoping to accomplish that year, whether I had it set for the beginning of the year. I usually walked in the school year with something. And then some point during the year, I would read something, see something, go to a conference, learn something, and I would have a whole new set of goals that I would bring to them as well. But it definitely helped me focus on accomplishing it more, because the kids are sitting in front of me every day.
Right.
And so there's no better accountability partner than someone that's watching you, even if it wasn't something that impacted my daily practice.
Right.
It was they're going to start wondering, hey, why hasn't he done this in a while? Or is he ever going to try that again? Or they might call me out on it. Mr. Herman, you haven't done this in a while, and you said this was one of your goals.
Right.
So you have those different audiences that can definitely work as your accountability partner.
Yeah.
So now let's say we use our students as our accountability partner. So one of my goals was to help this. I wanted the students to feel like they had more ownership in the classroom. And so I slowly created different ways for them to take ownership. One was designing the physical space of the classroom right off the get-go in the beginning of the school year. How does a child, whether they're age 5 to 18, seeing a professional, a teacher, or someone they hopefully respect and have good rapport with, seeing them work towards a goal, does that have any impact on them and their own goals?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's the modeling of how to value your own time, energy. What you're doing, is it worth investing in accountability, goal setting, like the structures that you create, really, they're really going to see it and go, oh, okay, that's an option. That's something I could do. Um, Particularly if you're really, being honest about when it works and when it doesn't. They need to see that there's a process. And I think it goes back to in a lot of ways being the learner, being the lead learner in your room, is, I think, a really valuable piece of the pie. Is a piece of how you can operate effectively. Is if you're the learner in the room, who's willing to, be vulnerable and have your process in front of them, then they say, oh, okay, that's they whether they adopt it or not, doesn't matter, but at least they see that that's how learning works. That's how humans work. Is you know they do have can see, and you can be trying out different ways of doing the goal. um, and I think it is really valuable to say, oh, that didn't work, um, and then say, either have the open conversation of like, well, I've decided that goal wasn't as important as I thought, and so I'm going to let it go, or I think it's really important, and so I need to keep trying and find a different, way to approach it. And having that conversation out loud not only helps yourself, but it helps them understand, you know, yes, you do sometimes, quitting's not an option. Well, you know, sometimes it is, and sometimes it needs to be, because it does not help anyone if hurt yourself in the process of trying to do something that isn't really true to who you are, or it just is not true to what needs to happen in right now. Um, so yeah, I think using frameworks is, I think, a really good way to help them understand, that it's not just, oh, I decided in my mind that I would do this, and then I made some superhuman effort and then achieved it. That's when I think, we kicked off with, are there some myths and things about, and it's like, oh, I can just set my mind to it, and my willpower will generate this, outcome in the world for me. That is definitely not how it works. And it's, in songs and things, or TV shows, like you have this, the Rocky who goes out and, achieves his goal.
Careful! I'm from Philly, so
Oh yeah.
aside from Rocky, yes, it is.
You're
We
right.
can't just set our mind to it and accomplish it.
And there is, it's perfectly valid to say, Rocky, it could be true to his character, like that could have been the thing that he needed to do in the world. Like that's perfectly valid. Um, but to say that I can set any goal and achieve it is like, you can set any goal consistent with who you are and the circumstances you have. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't be audacious. It should be audacious if you're setting large goals. Audacious is a really good thing. But it better be something that's really consistent with who you are and how you are in the world. I could set a big, hairy, audacious goals. So it's one of the tools that people use, right? But if it's not really consistent with who I am, I'm going to go win the Indy 500. And it's like, nah, that's not going to happen.
Right. I want to go back to the frameworks that you mentioned and see if there's any specific ones that are more valuable, or just maybe there's multiple to find the one that works for you. But is there um, is there a way to build goal success momentum? So if I am accomplishing goals, does that make it easier to set other goals that maybe, so let's say I had a goal right now and I just could not get any momentum towards it, and then I move on, and then I set a new goal and I knock it out of the park. I set another goal, I knock it out of the park, and then I come back to it and I say, I want to try that again. Have I built goal momentum, or does it still just need to align to what builds motivation, the autonomy, relatedness, and competency?
Right. So I would say that it wouldn't. I think it would be better to say your momentum is not about the goals. The momentum is choosing a goal that's aligned with how you are in the world. Um, and where your edges are. I don't know if you know about this idea of edges, of like you have a comfortable place in the middle, and then in certain directions in your life you can go and say, in your personal relationships, there's an edge to your relationships, an edge where you're not going to feel so comfortable. You're pushing your edges of you're getting to that edge of where your skill is about to drop off. Like you have to push into those things. So what you're building momentum in is some aspect of skills in the world, some aspect of self-expression, the autonomy piece in that world, and the building relationships around those things. So there is a form of momentum, but it's not just goal achieving momentum. It's how am I expressing in the world in a way that aligns with who I am? And who you are is about your needs. Now it's a little your needs are more than those, few things I've mentioned. I focus on the universal needs, but individuals have needs that are unique to them. They may have some that are culturally based, something that's how your culture values certain things. Um, and so what you're building is okay. I'm figuring out where who I am lines up with the needs of the world, um, and pushing those edges. And so what you're doing is building some set of capacities, in the world and in yourself, too. So if when you come back to that goal that fell off, if you can see how it furthers you along one of those edges, if it brings you to a new edge that you're willing to explore, willing to push against, then yes, there is a form of momentum there. But if you go in a completely different direction that you don't have, those, you're not as confident or competent, then you need to really be careful about approaching that and say, okay, is this really aligned with everything I need to be doing in my world right now, with who I am right now? Um, and so that is the tricky bit. Is okay, I've built in these directions, and now I'm going in a different direction. I mean, that's what I did, um, around COVID. Was I'd spent 8 years in environmental politics, um, and then I went, you know what, this isn't where I need to be right now. Like I made a change. 9 months into the pandemic, most people are still under lockdown. It's like I quit a job and took on writing the new book and things like that. So I really shifted everything. But that was largely about kind of my position in life had changed such that that was a reasonable thing to do. 8 years before, that wasn't a reasonable thing to do. And so I don't regret pursuing a different set of goals that I did for 8 years. I did some good work in the world. Um, built important skills, built, a lot of things that actually inform what I'm doing now, in education. So it's a matter of like, okay, now that was made more sense, and so I could come back to that and do that more centrally. So it is something that and I've, you know, I can say I wrote the book. I've got the website out. I've got a variety of it has
And
led to
even
skills.
your competencies could just change, where perhaps competency was the reason that your goal fell off, right?
Right.
And then you're coming back to it, and maybe you've built up more skills that would
Absolutely.
allow you to more competently approach that, and you might go over that hurdle. Take me
Absolutely.
back to frameworks. What are some goal setting and goal tracking frameworks that you think are successful, and even highlight is one better for adults versus our students to help them set their own goals?
I think that there are tons of interesting frameworks. And so, one of the ones that's more famous is the SMART goals, which there's actually several variations on it, but specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, and then you can have SMART-er, and you add evaluate and readjust. um, and then some people
Is
have
there a
some other
smartest
variations.
framework yet?
Yeah. So SMART is actually, you know um, because in some ways the opposite of that in is the BHAG, big hairy audacious goals. So this one person talks about, like SMART starts with specific, and another person says it's small, specific, sustainable actions. So there in some ways the big, hairy, audacious goals are you need to look at where you're talking about. Um, is this a team thing? Because that's where the big, hairy, audacious goals actually came from. Was really about whole companies and large groups really setting a big goal. Like, okay, you've got a whole team, you've got a lot of variety of things. That makes sense. But BHAG goals may not be the best thing for your personal life, and may not be the best thing for students um, until they're like, if you build your classroom into a unit that actually is cohesive and working well together, set a big, hairy, audacious goal for some. You still need to be kind of time bound with teaching the nature of it, um, but you can be a little more audacious once you have that sense of a team. So yeah, looking at context is really important, um, and the sophistication of who you're dealing with. Little kids are not going to have the same goals, and part of what you can be doing is experimenting with goals with them, like see where they land. One of the things, there's another framework that I wanted to uh, call hard goals: heartfelt, animated, required, and difficult. um, and the approach here is more about aligning the intentionality and the purpose, you know, more than being specific and clear. And like the SMART framework is understanding there's differences in how people operate in different environments. Like some environments, it's like, your computer programmers are going to be very precise, and it's going to be smart, and they might not need the heartfelt piece quite as much as say a group of artists who are working on a different kind of project. Is that the frameworks you choose should probably align with the nature of the goals you're trying to pursue, but also the nature of the group you're in part of, who you are as a person. I think frameworks, pretty much any framework that's getting some traction in the world, go on the internet and just say goal frameworks. I did that. Found a few I wasn't familiar with before. Um, but then if it fits for what you're doing, go for it. It's going to be great, because we all need structure. That's another thing that people sometimes don't understand about, like, the autonomy as a need. Is like, they think autonomy and structure are two different things, because of, in the U.S., it's because there was this whole movement in the 60s and 70s where throw out structure. What they meant was change the structure. Is they were just emphasizing different structures. Um, and most of those schools failed because they didn't understand the necessity of the structure itself. The ones who succeeded actually found structures that worked. They don't call them that necessarily, but they did. So we need structure. And so having a goal structure, having a framework to go through and see if your goal is it sufficiently relevant? Do you really have a specific amount of time frame for it? And then, you can move forward. Having those frameworks really helps. But I wouldn't say that there's a particular one. There is going to be one that works better for some things than others, but that's something you have to figure out. Like the goal setter has to be able to say, oh, okay, you know, I'm really going to structure goals in a certain way. Like I have one of these devices. This is the one that just got. This is the Halo, so it actually has just been. They decided not to support it anymore, so this is soon going to be a useless piece of electronic gear on my wrist. But part of the reason for getting this was like, oh, I can actually get some data, can be very clear and specific about how I'm actually doing, then setting goals, which actually that hasn't done a lot. Mainly because the frustrating thing about this, and I suspect the reason it's no longer worth supporting by the company, is they set arbitrary goals, and it's like, that goal's not meaningful to me, and you don't have a mechanism for fitting my goals into your system. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation. I ran a professional development session with teachers, and the overall topic was establishing relationships with students in positive ways to do that. And I brought up the topic of goal setting and how I used to do it in my classroom. And a teacher said to me that they were concerned with students setting goals, not reaching their goals, and being crushed by that. And they've seen it in their own children where it's something that they struggle to handle when they don't reach their goals. So I am never a binary person. I never think it's one way or the other and it has to be that way. I think there is always a middle ground. But I'm going to ask for a binary answer from you right now. Is it better for students to not experience goal setting at all, or is it better for them to experience goal setting in a classroom and potentially fail at reaching their goal?
The second for sure. They should experience goal setting. Now, the challenge of experiencing goal setting is, and when they're going to be crushed by not achieving a goal, you have to question how that goal was chosen and how it was pursued. Um, was it a goal that they were setting to please the teacher? Well, if you have to expect that that's going to be the case sometimes, and if you're building your relationship such that they would be crushed by your disappointment in their not achieving the goal, even though that's something you need to be careful about. That's a responsibility that you should take seriously, and you know this is where getting to know your students is so important. Is you have to know, like, I'm going to structure this goal and we're going to pursue this, but is it my goal or is it their goal? Because if it's mine, then you need to make sure that there's not the pressure on them that they're going to feel emotionally devastated by not achieving it. Because that's something that's, if they're simply devastated because of your disappointment, that's not a good idea. If they were fully committed to the goal and they fail and they're disappointed, the emotional crushing isn't the crucial thing. It's, are they is the emotions that they're going to feel around failing going to be something that is a valuable feature of their learning, or is it simply causing suffering that is not going to be valuable learning? It's just causing suffering, and they're not going to have the mechanism to reframe that emotion into, oh, okay, I can exert more effort, or I can take a different strategy, or I can, like, if it's their goal, they'll be like, okay, that was devastating. I really wanted that. But now I can pursue it in this other way, or this different way, or in this other format, or something. But if it was your goal and you disappear, then it ends, and it's like they're not, they just have a negative experience from that goal, and so they may associate that with goal setting itself, and that's not a good outcome.
So it's really how you're framing the result, whether it's successful or unsuccessful. If they're successful in their goal and they just say "Yay me" and move on, there's not really much of a learning experience there either, because they're not. If they don't take the time to evaluate, well, what did I do to reach that goal?
That's right.
What were the steps I took? How did I track myself? How was I held accountable? How was I supported by my teacher or my peers or my parents or guardians?
That's right.
And the same as not reaching the goal. If they don't reach the goal, but they have that same conversation, then the same value is there in reaching that goal and having that reflection.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so for classroom teachers to think one more thing, I have one more thing to fit in my classroom always seems impossible. But I can promise you that this is something that doesn't take a lot of time. You talk to students about your own goal, you share it, and you talk about, here's my plan to hold myself accountable. It's a 5-minute conversation. Next day, week later, the next, whenever, you say, okay, let's start to think about your own goals. And like you're saying here, Don, it's important that they really set goals that matter to them. And so when I would do it with my students, I would always say, listen, I want you to have some sort of academic goal. And my reasoning behind that was not because that was the most important thing, but it was something that I said, I can support you. I can provide you maximum support on your academic goal. I also want you to set a social goal or a outside of school goal. Anything else you want to accomplish, please, I want you to add that to your journal, and we can talk about that. And I can look at that and say, oh, I would have kids that would set like sports goals. Like I want to make a travel team, or I want to learn how to do this in a sport or something like that. And I might say, hey, I used to play that sport. Like one day at recess, I'll come out and I'll spend 10 minutes with you and I'll help you. Right. Or I could say, well, did you know that teacher used to play the piano? Have you ever considered asking them for advice, or see if they have a piano teacher they would recommend? So I could possibly support those external goals, but I wanted I would say I forced them to set an academic goal, but I didn't put any parameters on it. It was any subject, anything they wanted to accomplish, even if it was just get an A on one test for the first time in my life, right? Something that hopefully still mattered to them. And again, it didn't take a lot of time. And you can continue to sprinkle in those checkpoints or those conversations, whether it's as a whole class, meeting with them individually, but trying to find ways for them to remember their goals and to circle back to those goals, I think is important. But it's something that I truly believe you can embed into the classroom and not take a huge time commitment towards it.
Absolutely. And I think it is one of those things, like you said, is exposure to it good? Yes. And just making sure that you know you're clear. I had you set that academic goal. And so, we're not going to make a big deal out of it, except to the degree that they choose to. Like they can really invest in it and make it a big deal, and then that's great. That's a lot. That's usually more fun. But there's going to be times when they don't invest in that goal. They set it and they pursue it, and they may get some support. But that was something that you have to also be realistic about. What are the parameters around that? Where's the juice in this? Is it something that we can really um, uh, have it be the goal that like, okay, it's great if you achieve it. We're not going to be too upset about it, but we're going to have the debrief about that goal in any case. And that's what you're pointing to before, is if you have the debrief, regardless of what their investment was, part of the reflection can be, how invested were you? Is this important to you? Well, if it wasn't important and you didn't achieve it, then, okay, we'll try again with something maybe a little less, ambitious, or something that fits better with your level of investment. But also having that other goal is really important too, because then they can see whether there is something that personally they said it. It wasn't as it was. You asked them to set it, but it's going to be a little more of an investment for them because they created it from whole cloth, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's a really good. Yes, you should do it, expose them to it, find out ways to make sure the goals fit into the classroom experience. But then also you have to follow through with it and make sure that you remember it and follow through on it and debrief it when whatever the endpoint was, whether that's the game that they played, or the the recital, or whatever it is their goal was. But having some way to then say, oh, okay, how'd that work? Regardless of the outcome. Yes, you succeeded, but why did you succeed? Or if you didn't succeed, why didn't you succeed?
Mm-hmm. And listen, just try it. We get busy. I'll tell you flat out, there are, I could think back to years, or I won't even know the specific year, but I can tell you right now, I set goals with my class, and then 4 months later, I said, wow, none of us have looked at a single goal, including me, and look what happened. How many of us actually accomplished anything towards that goal? Great, not many of us, because we didn't spend the time, we didn't talk about it, we didn't circle back to it. So even in my complete lapse of supporting goals,
Mm-hmm.
it was still a learning experience to say, you can write something down, but if you don't think about it and you don't track it and you don't have a conversation around it, it's not going to move the needle. And so, and keep it simple. Have the kids write a 1-sentence goal, one sentence that relates to what you teach. Secondary teachers, I know you have more kids. As a self-contained elementary teacher, you only have 30. As a secondary teacher, you might have 150. But just boil it down to 1 sentence and just keep that on your class roster. And just, it's something you can glance at. And then it's, as you progress through, you can say, oh, this student has a writing goal. They're turning in a writing assignment. Let me highlight this with them right now. So just keep it as simple as possible. And even if there's, let's just say, mediocre success towards it, if you are circling back to a goal a student has set, even if they don't accomplish that goal, or even if it's a small goal that they reach, the fact that you are circling back on a goal that they set is going to have a huge impact on the rapport and relationship you have with that student, because it shows that you care and you listen to them and you are intentionally trying to do something to help them that they set for themselves. So I just think there's so many valuable pieces to it. So I want to, we need to cut this conversation off at some point just for time purposes. So is there anything really important related to successful goal setting that you don't think we've talked about here that would help teachers maybe push past the momentum, or help them accomplish goals if they are someone that really has struggled to set goals and reach those goals?
I think we've actually done a pretty good job. I think the I think the most important point, though, which I kind of kicked off with, was around those kind of meta goals that underlie all the goals you're setting. In one sense, setting goals is an expression of who you are, um, and so part of understanding why they succeed and fail can be okay. This really hit on the edge that I was in this particular area, um, and I think it comes back to, like, okay, do you really have the passion to pursue this? And if you don't, can you generate it? Because that's where you can cultivate that sensibility of, okay, I can find the edge of what I need to do in order to, take something that I have to do. I have to put up with doing it, but I can find ways to challenge myself within that, and still get it done. So I think it really gets to digging deep in yourself to ensure that you're really bringing your all to how you're pursuing it, and or how you're formulating it, and how you're pursuing it, and then how you follow up with it, to say, okay, when you I think it's really important to, when you mess up on a goal, when you discover, oh, I haven't paid attention to it, is do the debrief and say, okay, why didn't that work? What was it? And you're going to deepen your ability to formulate good goals, and have effective strategies for pursuing them by doing those debriefs. So you'll build that skill as well, even when it's
Right.
hard.
Right. And if you're struggling to think of something, teachers, and you haven't done this before, make your goal to set goals with students and to hold them accountable. That's the perfect way to kick it off. So your goal is to support their own goal setting pursuit, and that's a great way to try to introduce it into your classroom, because then you're focused on how to successfully embed it into your daily practice, or your weekly practice with them. So Don, thank you so much for coming back and joining us. Can you let our audience know where they can find out more about you, and where they can check out some of your books, and maybe just a quick elevator pitch on what some of those books would be for teachers?
So the best place to find me is holisticequity.org. And my book is called Schooling for Holistic Equity: How to Manage the Hidden Curriculum in K-12. For me, that's the place that I've poured myself into that forum, and made a lot of videos, and my book is available there. One of the things that just came out recently is a tool that I offer teachers to help them with assessing climate in your classroom in real time, or close to real time. So it's called the formative climate assessment. So you're probably familiar with assessments that are done once a year or twice a year. This is one you can use on a weekly, monthly basis, and really find out, whatever it is you're doing to build the climate, a positive climate in your classroom, do you know it's having the effects you want? This is a tool you can use very quickly and easily. Figure out what's going on. What is the climate in your classroom at this moment? Right now, the pieces that are available are around the need satisfaction for the students in the classroom, but more pieces around motivation and engagement will be coming available. But you can really get some good feedback and very specific, actionable data on what's going on and how to improve the climate immediately. So look under the Tools tab at holisticequity.org for the formative climate tool.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Don. And we will link up to your website on our show notes page, which can be found on our website at powereduup.com, or wherever you're watching and listening to this, you can just scroll down and there will be a clickable link there for you as well. So thank you again for joining us. I love this conversation. It's helping me reflect on my own goal setting, and I think it'll be helpful for teachers that are looking to embed this into their classroom for their students, as well as setting their own goals. And thank you to everyone for listening. If you have not already, please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to us, and share this out with other teachers to help them learn and grow as well. And so I hope you're enjoying your summer, and you can start to think about and reflect on some goals you want to set for the 2023-2024 school year. So Don, thank you so much. And hopefully we left you feeling powered up as we power down this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.